So Casey, you just got back from North Korea. That's a pretty big adventure. I know for me, like I've got a lot of ideas about what that will be like, but what was it like for you?
It was an adventure, but it really was not the country I thought it was. And from the second I got off the plane, the culture, the food is incredible. The history, all came together. And the first thing they do is put us on a bus and we go to the great leader and dear leaders' statues. They call them Mansudae monuments. And we're looking over the city, and the military and locals are coming up and they're giving flowers. And it was just a very powerful moment to see so much coming together and all the preparation for this trip. Another one of the first places we visited were the thatched huts and humble origins of the great leader Kim Il sung. He left his home at a young age and started the process of liberating his people from the Japanese up until about 1945. Every nation has its origin, and this is where it starts by their account. Maybe some people wouldn't consider this fun, but learning about a dam I thought was one of my favorite moments of the trip. This was our educational tour of the Nampo Dam and West Sea Barrage. This place is a big deal for the country because they received almost no help from abroad and changed the course of the water supply around the country, keeping the ocean from invading the freshwater Taedong River. Also, many of the first foreigners from abroad traveled through these canals to make initial contact with the Korean dynasties of the past. You could seriously write a lot of books on this place and on just this waterway. And they wanted to tell us that too.
They pushed ahead with the construction of the coffer dam around the lock area and the open dam across the river simultaneously.
The hotel was comfortable and also had this huge window my roommate and I would look out of to catch a view of the skyline. And every once in a while, there would be a performance or cultural dance happening across the street and outside the lobby. As a side note, while we are heading into the subway, you probably don't know this, but North Korean beer is world class, especially the dark beer which they served in the hotel. The story goes the country bought German brew technology and were trained on how to use it. And now it's just as good or better than anything you can find in Europe. That blew my mind a bit. We finally reached one of the deepest metros in the entire world, almost 350 feet below the surface, on our way to visit other sites around the city. I was told a couple 100,000 people take this path daily, and it felt like that. It was pretty crowded. As I was down there, I immediately noticed the murals and chandeliers that made it feel more like a nice restaurant or museum than a public transportation system. But one of the things I enjoyed most about this trip was every wall told a story. Most of the artwork was clearly patriotic and militaristic, but there were also beautiful paintings of Mount Pektu and finer nuances of their rich history. I mean, America is a couple hundred years old, but here there are thousands of years of dynasties to draw from. Almost everywhere we went, there were pictures of Kim Il sung and Kim Jong il, the great leader and dear leader, hung up out of respect, which you can see at the far end of this car. As another aside, while we were taking this short trip together, I say North Korea, but they prefer to call it Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The problem is I started calling it that when I returned home, and no one knew what I was talking about. And although it was crowded at times, what I most appreciated about this trip was I had a seat. When I lived in China a couple years ago, I almost never got a seat. It's the little things in life. This is the Arch of Triumph in Pyongyang, which was a tribute to Kim Il-sung and Korea's resistance against the Japanese. But the weirdest part was 1 week before, I had been spending time in Paris at the other Arch of Triumph. I had no idea there were two, let alone that I would see them in the same week. I will quickly come back to this, but take notice from this vantage point. We are on the steps of the National Library, and directly across in the very far distance is the Tower of the Juche Idea, because I am just about to take you there. You can see from here is where we just were. This is the top of the Juche Tower, or what could be called as the Tower of the Juche Idea. And down there is Kim Il-sung Square. The view is great, but the meaning of this monument is so much more significant to the people than we understand. The Juche Idea is the centerpiece of the political and philosophical framework for the country, and it stresses the need for self-reliance and self-defense, which, if you remember, was why I said earlier the West Sea Barrage was such a big deal to build. They didn't need anyone else. At the top, which you can't really see, there is this torch which lights up at night. And as far as the eye can see, there is this pulsing, burning red color which reminds you of Juche. I deeply respect the people in the culture, but it still reminds me of the Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings. One great place for a romantic stroll is along the Taedong River here at the bottom of the tower. I particularly enjoyed spending time here near this statue because it has the farmer, worker, and intellectual, which you can see holding a sickle, hammer, and writing brush, all symbols throughout the culture of the reigning Workers' Party. The Juche Tower has been erected for less than 40 years, but Korea as a whole has been around for over 5,000 years. And we went out to explore that history at the Folklore Park outside the city. It was, from my perspective, just a series of condensed sculptures and images which encapsulated the important symbols of the day. In the middle of the park, there were specific battle scenes recreated in statues, the Juche Tower in miniature form, and on the outside edges, traditional housing complexes and pagodas. You may not know this, but there is a lot of evidence that modern technologies from greenhouses to naval artillery and rocket launchers were all invented here in the last 1,000 years. This is where I was reminded that yes, it is a militaristic society, but in the scheme of history, this chapter is a pinpoint or a brushstroke. This culture is not simple, and you are already at a cultural disadvantage and looking through foggy lenses if you aren't actually able to connect with the people through speaking in their native language. I envy those people who think they understand this place.